So dear beloved community, it is November the 8th of the year 2020, and here we are sitting in so many places on earth. If we've reached November the 8th, this is something to really celebrate, something truly amazing that we've reached this moment together. I wonder how your week has been. When I consider how the week has been, I also consider how the year has been for many of us and what a year it's been. It's been a year of fires externally and also fires internally. It's been a year of pandemic. And now we've had an election that was hanging in the balance for many days and has global implications. And today, the moment has come that we've heard what many of us are calling the results of the US elections. So depending on who we voted for, we're experiencing relief and joy, or perhaps sadness. So I want to take this moment to share that on another level, to think that the results are only numbers that are revealed at a fixed moment in time might be a somewhat limited view. The real results, which are the results of our individual and collective thoughts, words, and actions, and not only numbers on a sheet of paper, reveal themselves to us in each and every moment through the way that we look at ourselves, the way we look at each other, the way we look at the world around, and the ways we speak and interact, the ways we reconcile or not. And this is one of the key challenges, the key invitations of this moment. And perhaps it might even be the most challenging one of all. To not think that, okay, the election is done now and go on about our everyday lives, but rather to realize that the real work is the work of each and every moment. If we don't do this essential, daily, unglamorous work of communicating, of reconciling, of building and rebuilding bridges, and we think that the work is done, then the situation of division in our nation or in the world will continue regardless of who's in office. So this, for me, I feel is the real challenge and the real invitation of this moment for each of us to show up, to do our part, to bring each other together. This is what is meant by that phrase that we hear so often, being the change. And it takes a lot of courage because it means to show up in each and every moment being vulnerable and being fierce at the same time. It means leaving no one behind. I think that also for the activists among us, it might even mean, to quote a very dear friend of mine who has a lot of wisdom, perhaps doing less, but doing the things that we do with more love. The kind of love that leaves nothing, that leaves no one out. I don't know about you, but I'm the kind of person that turns to poetry often. And it's kind of appropriate when we think that we're currently working through 16 poems as our Dharma Talk topics over the next period of time. So tonight, considering the situation that we've been experiencing collectively over the past period of time, there are two poems that I'd like to share with you that I feel speak to this moment. The first is by James Baldwin, and it's called For Nothing is Fixed. For nothing is fixed forever, forever, forever. It is not fixed. The earth is always shifting. The light is always changing. The sea does not cease to grind down rock. Generations do not cease to be born, and we are responsible to them because we are the only witnesses they have. The sea rises, the light fails, lovers cling to each other, and the children cling to us. The moment we cease to hold each other, the moment we break faith with each other, the sea engulfs us, the light goes out. And the second poem is by a young poet called Amy Maddox, and she was 16 when she wrote this poem, and it has a lot of insight in it. And I often like to reflect on this poem, and I wanted to share it with everybody this evening before we dive into the poems that we're going to be exploring this evening from the Book of Eights. He prayed, it wasn't my religion. He ate, it wasn't what I ate. He spoke, it wasn't my language. He dressed, it wasn't what I wore. He took my hand, it wasn't the color of mine. But when he laughed, it was how I laughed. And when he cried, it was how I cried. Underneath, we're all the same. So dear beloved community, I wonder if you're still continuing to enjoy this beautiful text, the Book of Eights. I know that it can be a different experience for many of us to be systematically moving through a text over the course of many months. I hope that you're allowing this beautiful and direct infusion of wisdom to sink in every day. Personally, when I discovered this text, I felt that I'd won the lottery. It's such a direct infusion of insight. In one of the texts in Chanting from the Heart, the Plum Village chanting and recitation book, there's a text called The Store of Precious Virtues. And part of that discourse, part of that recitation reads, the incomparable understanding is not to be grasped. It's not an object of realization. There is no awakening. Someone who hears this without feeling terror is a bodhisattva who has the capacity to understand the Buddha. And this short excerpt from the Store of Precious Virtues speaks directly to the main themes that we'll be exploring in the poem that we'll be looking at tonight and over the next few weeks. In the third poem that we've been exploring over the past 2 weeks, there was an emphasis on recognizing our views, the frameworks of our perceptions, and practicing to not identify ourselves with them. There was also a very important invitation for each of us to reflect on. Do we hold on to certain ideas and practices, spiritual or otherwise, that actually support and deepen our entrenchments, rather than helping us to liberate ourselves? This text, the Book of Eights, the Atthagavagga, and some of the poems that we'll be exploring are among the foundational texts of the Plum Village tradition. And they're key to understanding the deep roots of the order of interbeing in the Plum Village lineage, and the emphasis on non-attachment to views and direct experimentation that are present in our lineage. I really love the image in the last poem, shaking off all views. I wonder if you've ever seen a lotus leaf. When water falls on a lotus leaf, it forms into little droplets and simply rolls off. And this is the image that arises for me when I consider that line in the poem. Truthfully, in order to function in our daily lives, we need to have some views. A small example might be the example of defiled or immaculate. Whilst having the profound insight that in the ultimate dimension, these two categories are limiting views. In order to clean the house or to wash the dishes, or even to keep your body healthy, you need to have a clear view about what is dirty and what is clean. But we let it roll off like water on a lotus leaf. We don't hate views or create yet another inner struggle against something, against views. We've got so many inner and outer struggles already. As Tay, our teacher, has taught us, we recognize and smile to them. And we recognize that a drop of water is one drop, and the ocean is so much vaster than just one drop of water. In this week's poem, the emphasis shifts a little, helping us to recognize where we're grasping onto things that can be seen, heard, or thought about, and mistaking them for realization, mistaking them for insight. So why don't we listen to the fourth poem in its entirety, and then we'll have a brief look at each stanza and some of the key points of each stanza. Someone who wants purity and thinks to find it by gazing at that which is pure might say, I see something pure and excellent, free of decay. Seeing it purifies me. If seeing or some intellectual process could rid you of dukkha, of suffering or unsatisfactoriness, the purifying agent would be outside you and you'd be left still eager to grasp. This view describes a grasping person and not any path to purity. No true noble one says purity or liberation comes in connection with anything outside, nor in terms of what is seen, heard, or sensed, habits or practices. Neither good nor evil affect her. She's given up the grasping self and is no longer creating or making up anything here. If you abandon one thing just to cling to the next thing, you'll never free yourself since you're following your craving. Continuing to embrace this and to reject that, you're like a monkey releasing one branch only to seize at another. A person caught in concepts regarding their religious practices experiences highs and lows, but having clearly known and having encountered the Dharma for themselves, one deeply discerning no longer swings from high to low. Such a person is no longer an enemy to anything seen, heard, or thought. How in this world could assumptions be made about those who see in this way, who live so openly? They take no theoretical position, claiming it to be the ultimate. They have untied the knot of grasping that bound them. They no longer wish for anything in the world. Having known and having seen for themselves, there's nothing that the true noble one, the true Brahman, would grasp onto. They've gone beyond the boundaries, neither passionate for passion, nor obsessed by dispassion. There's nothing to grasp at as the highest. So this is such a beautiful poem that we'll be looking into over the next couple of weeks, incredibly profound. And at best, I can offer only just a few little pointers of some of the main themes in each verse. So we'll begin just by going through each of the stanzas and directing our attention to some of the main themes. And I hope it'll be an invitation for you to continue your own explorations. Someone who wants purity and thinks to find it by gazing at that which is pure might say, I see something pure, excellent, free of decay. Seeing it purifies me. If seeing or some intellectual process could rid you of dukkha, of suffering, of dissatisfaction, the purifying agent would be outside you and you'd be left still eager to grasp. This view describes a grasping person, not any path to purity. So reading this stanza, I was reminded of something that a wonderful Chinese doctor who, honestly, she saved my life 3 times now. She's an amazing herbalist. She once shared with me Teva Pai. In Chinese medicine, we have a saying, if you sleep next to the medicine pot, then even if you don't drink the medicine, but the medicine is cooking away and the steam is coming out of the pot, the medicine will enter your body through the pores of your skin. So the first part of the poem is a sharing from that perspective. It presents a viewpoint, and at the beginning of the poem, it presents this viewpoint, and then the rest of the stanza, the rest of the poem, in fact, is dedicated to refuting this view. In the beginning of the poem, basically we hear a statement that there might be some of us who think that just by looking upon something pure or ultimate, that we ourselves are transformed. Pure here is a translation of the Pali word Suddha, and it refers to transforming our suffering into wisdom. Perhaps we might also consider reflecting on this stanza in terms of there may be some of us who believe that just by talking about the Dhamma, or peace, or liberation, or loving kindness, or transformation, or reading or thinking about these things, or listening to Dhamma talks only, that we transform our suffering. So it's only through actually putting something into practice in our lives that transformation is possible, not only just through thinking about it or memorizing lists, as much as some of us love lists, or debating, again, as much as some of us love debating, or getting a degree in Buddhist studies, and so on. None of these things will necessarily transform our suffering, our situation, most likely not. And in fact, they might actually increase our afflictions. A couple of years ago, I was in a Buddhist institute presenting a paper for the academic faculty and students. One monk who was a very accomplished monk, he had a number of degrees and qualifications, and he was assigned as my attendant while I was there. And we were having tea together, and he became mystified when I offered him instruction on mindfully drinking his tea. And he shared with me that actually in the course of all of his study, even though he had all of these qualifications, nobody had ever offered him practical instructions in meditation. He knew all the theory, but as he said himself, he didn't know how to put any of it into practice. And my heart went out to this young monk. Our teacher, Tay, is an incredible scholar, and he always emphasized 1 hour of study needs to go with 7 hours of each of us considering how to apply what we've learned in our daily life. Otherwise, it's not very helpful. The background for this first stanza, this beginning part of this beautiful poem, is the belief in India that dates to ancient times that looking upon certain things will help us to manifest these qualities in our life. It's called darshan. While the Buddha always emphasized the importance of environment, with a sense that the environment we surround ourselves with supports our practice and is actually a manifestation of it, there's also the understanding that transformation comes from within each one of us, and indeed is the responsibility of each one of us. There's also another layer to the first stanza that I'd like to mention, and that's the difference between outer seeing, of looking upon something as an object, and seeing from within. Each time we recite the sutra opening verse, we recite the lines to see, hear, to study, and to practice the Dharma. So what does it mean to you to see the Dharma in each and every moment? Not as an object outside, but right within the heart of your own experience. In the context of this poem, and in the context of Buddhism itself, a noble one, a Brahmin, is not noble because of birth or status or anything like that, or because of inheritance, but because of this quality, this capacity of seeing from within. And the poem continues. No true noble one, Brahmin, says purity or liberation comes in connection with anything outside, or in terms of what's seen, heard, or sensed, habits or practices. Neither good nor evil affect her. She's given up the grasping self and is no longer creating or making up anything here. So in India, according to the ancient caste system, only those born into the Brahmin class could be considered to be Brahmins or noble ones. But in Buddhism, as mentioned before, we don't consider somebody noble due to their birth or their status, but rather through the transformation that they manifest in their lives. In this stanza, we're reminded that no one who is wise, who's tasted the Dharma for themselves, would think that the qualities that we're searching for come from anywhere outside of ourselves. I always see this stanza, in addition to its reminder to reevaluate our habitual ways of thinking, our habitual ways of perceiving, our habitual ways of evaluating, as an incredibly empowering stanza, because it reminds each of us that we have more than enough capacity to transform our situation. And then the poem continues, if you abandon one thing just to cling to the next thing, you'll never free yourself since you're following your craving. So last week we looked at our tendency to both hold on to things, people, ideas, situations, habits, and perceptions, and identify with them. And additionally, we explored the theme that is repeated throughout the Book of Eights, that if we're not careful, if we're not discerning and attentive, then what we call our spiritual practice can actually just support our entrenchments and become a form of bypassing. I think that a good way to approach this is to consider whether we've gotten into a situation where we just want to be comfortable. We're not willing to expand our envelope anymore. Or we notice ourselves reacting quite strongly when our views or perceptions are challenged even slightly. In this stanza, we're reminded not to let go of one thing just to hold on to another. When we haven't touched things as they are, we might have a tendency to grasp onto ideas, notions, and dogmas. And this might even include ideas that we have about liberation or the ultimate, and so on. An idea of these things might be a skillful means to help us move forward in our spiritual lives. But as we continue along, then we begin to see that many times our ideas of things can prevent us from touching their reality. As Tay has said, our idea of happiness can prevent us from touching it right here and right now. Our idea of liberation or the ultimate or the pure is just that. It's an idea. It's not the thing itself. Just like the menu in the restaurant is not the dish itself. If we haven't touched and tasted these things for ourselves, then there can be a tendency to define ourselves by them. And in that case, we have a tendency to cling onto them madly. In fact, that's the usual way things go. Let's enjoy the sound of the bell. And the poem continues, continuing to embrace this and to reject that. You are like a monkey releasing one branch only to seize at another. A person caught in concepts regarding their religious practices experiences highs and lows, but having clearly known and encountered the Dharma for themselves, a deeply discerning one no longer swings from high to low. I don't know about you, but I find this stanza to be a very confronting one, a very powerful stanza. If we allow ourselves to enter this metaphor and imagine ourselves as a monkey swinging from tree to tree, then there's a moment in which we have to release the branch behind in order to move forward. And in moving forward in that moment, if we enter that metaphor, if we enter that experience, we define our security as grasping onto the branch in front. But here, we're reminded that rather than plunging into danger, counterintuitively, against every one of the notions that we would have, in a spiritual sense, our true freedom is found when we let go of the branch behind and don't reach out and grasp onto the next one. The next branch here being concepts, notions, ideas, or rites and rituals, and so on. This insight, this realization of true freedom, of freedom everywhere, is only found when we taste the fruit of the Dharma for ourselves. Otherwise, we're only holding on to an idea, a notion, or a concept of the Dharma. This is what is being conveyed to us in this poem. Our teacher Tay was very free. He had the freedom of insight. I remember when we were in Vulture Peak in India in 2008, whenever our community would practice together on Vulture Peak, our teacher Tay would love to transmit the mindfulness trainings, whether it was the 5 mindfulness trainings, the 14 mindfulness trainings of the Order of Interbeing, or for the monastics, Tay always loved for us to renew our ordinations, to renew our precepts. And in fact, Sister Chen Kong and Sister Chen Duk, Sister Annabelle were ordained on Vulture Peak in the late 1980s. So in 2008, we gathered for a transmission of the 14 mindfulness trainings on Vulture Peak. And the transmission of the 14 mindfulness trainings is a very solemn and meaningful ceremony. And it usually takes about an hour and a half. On this day, after the Sangha Karman procedure, rather than launching into the usual form of the ceremony, Tay turned to the ordinee and said, "Have you been mentored in the 14 mindfulness trainings? Have you studied each of the trainings in depth? Do you practice with and do you have the support of your community to take these trainings?" The candidate answered yes to each of those questions. And then Tay said, "In the presence of the Sangha here on Vulture Peak, you formally received the mindfulness trainings and have become a core member of the Order of Interbeing. Please touch the earth 3 times. That was the conclusion of the transmission ceremony. So there's form, but there's also content. So as Tay has taught us, we need to practice so as to have the insight of non-duality or non-separation. Not just as a whole other set of concepts, but as a realization, to see, as Tay shared with us, the interbeing nature of things, this and that, me and you, night and day, suffering and happiness, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, liberation, samsara. Dare I say it? Democrat, Republican. Each depends on the other. And that might be something to really hold in our mind at this moment in time, particularly in the United States, that each depends on the other. Why do we think that there's a shore of liberation that's in a different place to where we are right now? If we have this idea, then we swing from high to low. We begin to think of our spiritual life as something separate from sitting on the train, or cleaning the windows, or cutting the grass, which is something that we need to do here in Mountain Spring. There's a lot of grass. And to see these things as separate from our spiritual life would be a pity. And the poem continues. Such a person is no longer an enemy to anything seen, heard, or thought. How in this world could assumptions be made about those who see in this way, who live so openly? I've spoken repeatedly about not creating or continuing to contribute to an inner war, of not turning our spiritual practice into a battle where we consider some things or some parts of ourselves as bad and some things or some parts of ourselves as good. In fact, many of you will remember that during the series of talks that I offered on the 5 hindrances, I actually referred to them as humorous and interesting opportunities for practice. Qualities that, if we know how to take care of them and to look into them and to transform them, are actually the very ground of our practice itself. The places where our true honesty, our true transformation is. And if we bring the light of mindful attention and investigation to them, rather than shutting them out, then they become our practice itself. They can become, the transformation of them can become the wisdom, the healing wisdom that we bring into our own lives and into the world. Wisdom doesn't fall from the sky, but it's contained in turning towards and understanding our anger, understanding our loneliness, understanding our jealousy, looking deeply into them and their origins. The word open here in this stanza refers to a person who has seen and begun to transform the roots of greed, of ill will or aversion, and delusion within themselves. They're considered to be someone who has had their roof opened up, which is a truly lovely image. And that image is repeated in a number of other texts in the Buddhist canon, to have your roof opened up, a little bit like a sunroof opens on a car. And the poem continues, they take no theoretical position, claiming it to be the ultimate. They've untied the knot of grasping that bound them, and they no longer wish for anything in the world. So in this stanza, we're reminded that a person who's had this deep understanding, who's had this taste of the Dharma, no longer takes a theoretical position, a position that's just based on what we have read, what we've heard about, or just what we've intellectually understood about something, but rather knows and speaks from their own experience. Having understood for ourselves how grasping and identification operate, and we've been given more than enough tools, even the most simple tools, in terms of looking at our sense impressions and noticing how our relationship to the pleasant, the unpleasant, or not yet pleasant, and the mixed operates, and what we run after and what we run away from, and other practices to help us to identify for ourselves how this process of grasping and identification works. Then when we begin to understand that, then over time, our search for something outside begins to diminish, and at a certain point, we're not looking for anything outside anymore. We realize in a very deep way, just like in the Lotus Sutra, that there's been a gem hidden in our overcoat all along, while we've been running around here and there begging for pennies. So having known and having seen for themselves, there's nothing that a true noble one, a Brahmin, a true Brahmin, would grasp onto. They've gone beyond the boundaries, neither passionate for passion or obsessed by dispassion. There's nothing to grasp at as the highest. So in this stanza, there's a very interesting phrase, having gone beyond the boundaries. Or perhaps we could also look at this phrase as having gone beyond the limitations. There are many interpretations of this line, but the one that's most relevant here refers to the 10 fetters, the 10 samyojanas, the qualities that tie us to suffering, that keep us attached to suffering, and that feed this quality of becoming, this quality of bhava that we've spoken about in quite a lot of detail. So it wouldn't be a Dharma talk if there wasn't a list somewhere. So I thought it would be helpful to offer this list of the 10 factors that hold us, that keep us in this cycle of repeated dissatisfaction. And within the context of this poem and in the context of the Book of Eights, these 10 fetters are seen to be the boundaries, seen to be what limit us. And that if we're able to transform and release ourselves from these 10 factors, these 10 fetters, then our roof is taken off. Our roof is open. We're considered to be an open person. So the first is the notion of a separate self that's independently existing from anything else. The second is skeptical doubt, And we've had a look at skeptical doubt a few times as we've gone through various series of teachings. Most recently, when we looked at the 5 hindrances. Then the third is attachment to outward rites and rituals. And the fourth is sensual desire, being caught in this cycle of sensual desire. The fifth is ill will. And number 6 and number 7 are quite similar. They're the thirst or the craving for continuation, either in the form world or mental continuation. And then the 8 is conceit, being puffed up and over full of oneself is another way to look at it. The 9th is a quality that I don't think anybody experiences very often, and that's restlessness. And then the 10th is ignorance. So these 10 factors are the factors that are considered to be the factors that limit us, that form the boundaries. And in the context of the Book of Eights, transforming these factors helps us to become a free person, an open person. In this final stanza, notice the phrase, neither passionate for passion, nor obsessed by dispassion. There's nothing to grasp. Again, there's this reminder to not get caught up in pairs of opposites, nor to allow any idea about something to become an obsession in the sense that it shuts us down to the lived reality of our lives. It might be interesting to reflect on whether it's possible to become attached to non-attachment. And that's definitely an invitation in this line here. So this poem begins and ends with a challenge to us to consider what's meant by the highest or the ultimate, of what we orient our spiritual lives toward. And that's an important reflection for us this week. Notice that in the context of this poem in the Book of Eights, the ultimate is not defined. We just hear words such as pure or highest or ultimate. So it would be a very helpful thing over the course of the next couple of weeks for each of us to reflect on, what do we consider to be the highest? What do we consider to be the ultimate? And to know, of course, that we'll come up with many things, and these are, of course, just views, and that the ultimate or the highest is beyond all of those things. But having a little sense of what we orient our spiritual lives towards can be a very helpful practice indeed. So I wish everybody a wonderful couple of weeks of practice with this poem. I hope that you've enjoyed having a look into this poem this week. It's certainly been lovely to practice together with everybody. May this be one of many blessings on your path. We'll end with 3 sounds of the bell.